right here in Nashville by Vanderbilt University. And therefore, we need to do it at a minimum level because I assure you, Soviet Union, just as Mr. Gorbachev has admitted, he's doing it right now for his own country.
You were shaking your head no, Mr. Brilderson.
Excuse me, I just don't think Bob's assertion is correct. I have on several of these forums and in a newspaper interview and several others said that I do favor continuing a level of basic research on the program because I think it makes sense to do that.
Mrs. Eskind?
Let me just say that I have always supported research in SDI. We need to know what the program can do, but I also support research in SDI so that we'll know what the Soviets know as well. And I was aware that they were doing research on SDI.
Mr. Searcy?
Well, vive la différence. You see, because SDI has been given no sanction by anybody creditable, i.e. anyone who's divorced from the research. So at MIT, where there's some research, you hear a few people saying that it's workable. At Caltech, you hear some people saying that it's workable. And now potentially at Vanderbilt, you may hear some people say that it's workable. It stinks. And what the Soviets are going to find, if they do any research at all, is that it's not going to work for them either. And what we need to be about is having a treaty that memorializes a commitment by both countries that they're simply not going to do that kind of research. And instead, let's try to solve world health problems like AIDS, because it's in Moscow, Tennessee, potentially, as well as in Moscow, Soviet Union.
Back to the audience. Tom?
Your name, please, and who is your question for?
My name is Herbert Gabhart, and I'm directing the question primarily to Bob Clement because Bob, having recently come out of higher education administration. And this is my question. Do you see strong support of debt reduction and strong support for higher education, and in fact, any educational program, incompatible? If so, then what? If not, why not?
Well, Dr. Gebhardt, as all of us know, is one of the greatest presidents of any college in the United States, and he was president of Belmont for a number of years, and now Chancellor. Dr. Gebhardt, it's not going to be easy to balance the budget and do some great things we want to do, particularly in education. I think education is the easiest, best, cheapest way to reduce the gap between the haves and the have-nots. I am fully supportive of supporting education at all levels. I don't normally quote a Republican, but I will tonight. Bob Dole says education is a national concern, a state responsibility, and a local function. I think that's correct. I think the national government should move toward being more of a full partner, working with state and local government. We've seen some terrible cuts in education in recent years, as we've both experienced, in Pell Grant money, guaranteed student loan money, work-study money, that I think should be restored in order to keep a strong middle class in America.
We'll be back to continue our questioning of the candidates from our guest here aboard the General Jackson right after these messages.
I'm crazy about the islands. The sun, palms, tropical breezes, and Fresh Chef salad always takes me there. Fresh taste in a prepared salad? Yeah, Fresh Chef is in the dairy case. Take this tropical delight fruit salad. Pineapple, oranges, grapes, coconut, very exotic stuff. And the flavor? We're talking Tahiti. Wait till you taste the other varieties. They'll blow you away.
Fresh Chef salads, fresh taste in the dairy case.
Now that the holidays are here, what do you really want?
I want to get my husband something he can use, something practical. And I want the price to be the best anywhere.
What you want is Walmart. Our hardware department is filled with great gift ideas, and Walmart's prices on brand names have never been sharper, like this Black & Decker cordless screwdriver. Now it's on sale through Saturday for just $16.96. That's value.
That's what I want.
Shop Walmart. We're all you want for the holidays.
Captain D's Shrimp and More Dinner for only $2.99.
$2.99, you can't go wrong.
Golden fried shrimp, fish fillet, and more.
just right.
And what's more, it's only $2.99 right now.
For the amount of food you get on this plate, that's a very, very good price.
Captain D's Shrimp and More for just $2.99. What more could you want?
That's a good deal. No doubt in my mind.
I'd come back to Captain D's every chance I get.
Delicious.
Captain D's. Gunsmoke, weeknights at 11 on Channel 5.
Let's continue our questioning of the candidates from our guest here aboard the General Jackson. Tom, who do you have now?
With me now is Angela Driver. Ms. Driver, your question, please.
Yes, my question is for Mr. Walter Searcy. Mr. Searcy, you have suggested a very broad and innovative plan that all 18 to 25-year-olds should serve 2 years of military or civil service. And I was wondering what you had in mind, if you were thinking in terms of a draft or exactly how you intended to implement such a plan.
And you forgive me for this search that I have in my mouth, but I'm going to keep it here. My plan is a compulsory plan, as envisioned. It is a plan that would include all men and all women of that age group on a compulsory level. It will also contemplate, however, some of us who are slightly beyond that age range to volitionally serve in some capacity in that regard as well. It just makes sense. It makes sense because as we look at our overall political economy, there's a big glitch that exists in that age group as persons are trying to make the transition from institution to work. There's also a lack of moral fortitude that seems to come from that age group, having been in school for an entire period of time, not being forced to deal with the problems of the real world in any fundamental way. I'm very impressed by the fact that there were 28 and 29-year-olds who were involved in the insider trading on Wall Street of recent and indicted because of that. I'm very impressed by that and the fact that they were not in the world of work very long, but had been in school for an extraordinary number of years.
Mr. Searcy, as a young man, you were something of an activist. How would you have reacted as an 18-year-old if you were required to belly up to the bar and take a couple of years out of your life?
Well, in terms of the options of civilian or military service, I probably would have smarted about it, but I think I could have complied with it.
Okay. Yeah. Tom?
With me now is Tommy Phillips. Mr. Phillips?
Mr. Bredesen, as a businessman in Nashville, I'm concerned that when you and the other partner sold Health America last year, that you pocketed $225 million. Yet, the limited partners in that venture who had vested $50,000 each 4 years earlier didn't even get their original investment back. Didn't you feel a moral obligation, given that you had made $45 million, to at least let them make their $50,000 back?
Well, excuse me, I felt a very strong moral obligation at the time the company was sold, which was done over my objections, to act in every way that I possibly could to treat everyone involved with the company fairly. The common shareholders of the company are and were entitled by law to the first benefits of the sale, and that's the way it happened. That's the way lawyers advise. That's the way I think was the fairest way of handling it. The limited partners did not lose their money. They simply continued with their investment under a new regime, a new company, MaxiCare. And to the best of my knowledge, you will, at some point in the normal course of things, just as you would have had Health America still been there, make some return on that money. And I hope it's a good return.
We're ready for the next question from the floor, if there's no follow-up. And I think the question's coming from Mr. Bronson Ingram, who is president of the Nashville Area Chamber of Commerce.
Chris, thank you. I'd like to ask a question to each of the candidates, but I would ask that you determine the order in which they go.
Okay.
Your first question had to do with the deficit, which in my judgment is the most serious problem we have in this country today. And you asked them specifically what programs they'd cut, and then if they couldn't cut the deficit to the point where we had a balanced budget, you asked specifically what taxes they'd raise. Well, I didn't hear anything. I didn't hear any response to the tax question, and I recognize that that's not a popular subject 3 or 4 nights before the election. But if you will assume for a moment that we have a Congress, evidently doing the will of the people, that is determined to spend more money than we have revenue coming in from our tax system, which seems to be the case, and I believe that's the case, I believe we have to raise taxes. I don't think we can balance the budget by cutting $150 billion out of defense. I don't think I see much evidence that we're going to touch Social Security and the transfer payments, and there isn't enough left in the rest of the budget to do it. So assuming we're going to have to do something about taxes, I'd like to know what sort of taxes they think are most reasonable and realistic.
According to the rotation, I'm told, Mrs. Eskind, you get to go first at this, and then we'll go to Mr. Searcy in the back round.
Bronson, in response to your question, one of the things that interested me was that the President and the Congress got together to agree on what the deficit reduction was going to be, but what they couldn't agree on was which taxes were going to be imposed. And I must say that in this instant learning experience that's called running for Congress, where you suddenly become an instant expert on a variety of intricate and complicated problems, my wisdom is not greater than the President's or the Congress's at this point. But I think that one of the first things we have to do is look at what got us in this position in the last 6 years. See what was done that we might want to consider undoing and reversing.
Mr. Searcy?
Mr. Ingram, I'm not convinced at this time that any new tax increases need to be imposed upon our country and its citizens, if for no other reason than a certain layer tends to bear the extraordinary burden of those taxes when others go without shouldering same. Furthermore, we're not going to resolve this budget problem this year, this fiscal year, nor the next one, nor probably the next one. So it's a long-term solution and a long-term comprehensive process that we're going to have to knuckle under and deal with. I see focusing then on the revenue side of the picture much more than on the revenue side of the picture in terms of how we redevelop those cold spots in our economy that so sorely go begging for that kind of redevelopment. When we do that, we will begin to add additional revenues back into the budget simply by making people more productive and by making people more contributors and reducing the number of absolute sycophants and those persons who are actually taking away. In that process, over a number of months, we will ultimately get to where we want to get to, and I suggest to you that we can do it without imposing any new tax burdens on our people.
Mr. Bredesen.
Mr. Ingram, you know, you're a businessman, as I've been, and certainly whenever you find a business which is in trouble in some way, the people who are running the business always focus on, well, what we need are new revenues. We need more sales, and that will solve all of the world's problems. It rarely is the solution to any of the problems because the problems lie generally within the business. I think there's the same analogy applies to the United States Congress and the United States budget. That once we start taking the pressure off what's going on in the budget by starting to talk about new taxes, by providing new taxes, if that's what happens in this Congress, that we really have foregone an opportunity to really address the fundamental issues of excessive spending and inappropriate spending in the budget. I'm not for new tax increases because I think that pressure does need to be kept on the Congress.
Excuse me, your microphone is not on there.
Phil, do you really believe that we can get through the recession that we'll surely have in the next few years? After all, we've gone 6 years without one, and the size budget deficit that will engender without, if you want to go in business terms, increasing our margins?
I don't adopt it as an axiom that we're going to have a recession of any substantial severity. It looks to me like we have made the right moves in the past few weeks to avoid recession as a result of these fluctuations in the stock market. We'll know a lot better here in a couple, 3 months. But I think the very real possibility exists, yes.
Mr. Clement?
Well, under Graham Rudman, as all of us know, we'll balance the budget within 6 years, and I think you know we're not going to balance the budget in 1 year. I do think that now the President and Congress have some numbers to work with, that the next 2 years the target is to cut the budget by $75 billion, realizing that there's no way to balance the budget in a one-year period of time, or we're going to cause economic havoc to our economic system, and I don't think any of us want to do that. But we can do it, in my opinion, over a 6-year period of time, and I'd like to think we could do it by trimming costs rather than increasing taxes, and I would devote my attention in that area.
If I could follow up on Mr. Ingram's question for a moment. Assume for a moment that one of you, or all of you, has a chance to be elected to the United States Congress, and Speaker Jim Wright says on the first day, okay, ladies and gentlemen, I want your proposal for the first tax increase you would propose if we have to increase taxes. Do any of you have a choice, a first choice, for increasing tax revenue if that's necessary? Mr. Bredesen?
I don't have a first choice. It seems to be a complex technical question in terms of its impact on the economy, and I don't have an answer to that question of the first tax increase.
On the Public Service Commission and the TVA, I always weigh all the facts and information prior to making any decision. I bring it back to the people and have town meetings, hearings, in order to get their input. The American people will sacrifice. They're willing to sacrifice as long as it's fair and equitable, and as long as they're given all the facts and information to make a decision.
Ms. Eskind?
I have no surefire solution or projection in what would be the first tax. I would say I would study it, and I'll get back to you, Mr. Speaker. I must say that Bob suggests that Graham-Rudman is a solution, and Graham-Rudman, to my way of thinking, is just an admission of defeat. It's saying that, we can't do anything about the problem, and we're going to abdicate our authority. We're just going to cut everything blanket. We're not going to set any priorities. We're not going to talk about what we care about. We're not going to say this is more important than that. We're not going to put any personal spin on the economic ball. We're just going to throw up our hands, admit defeat, and walk away from it. And I am opposed to the Graham-Rudman for that reason.
Mr. Searcy? Mr. Clement, I think, wants to comment just briefly on her answer, then we'll get to
Chris, I just want to say quickly what Jane just said. Graham-Rudman's not a perfect piece of legislation, but the fact is it forces the president hand that half those budget cuts have to come from the defense side of the budget. And that is a step in the right direction. I want a strong national defense, but we're spending $300 billion today on national defense. We're spending $800 million a day on national defense, and I think there's just some savings there that can come about if we all work together to accomplish that goal.
Mr. Searcy.
Tom, I believe your question was, what my response would be to the Speaker of the House regarding such an assertion. And I would simply say, respectfully, sir, I don't believe we've looked at the cost accounting and the revenue-generating programs we can introduce by tailoring legislation and passing new legislation that would allow us to do the kinds of things that I proposed in my economic development scheme. And that's what I'd stand on, and that's what I rest on. So I don't accept your premise. I don't accept the premise of the fictional Speaker of the House that would suggest to me that I would have to draft a tax bill. I simply would not draft one.
Okay, our next question comes from Mr. Tommy Plaster, retired executive from American Airlines. Mr. Plaster.
My question is directed to Mrs. Eskind, and that is, would you be willing to correct the inequity of the notch baby issue on Social Security? And also, if you go to Washington, would you be willing to bite the bullet by putting at least a 5-year moratorium on the COLAs?
Well, let's explain what the notch babies are.
Well, I know what they are.
1917 through 21.
Yes.
Got a reduced Social Security. I happen to fit in that picture. That's the reason I'm short.
And Mr. Plaster, I am aware of the notch babies, the notch program. I think it's patently unfair, and I would go to Washington to fight to have those 5 years put back into equity within the Social Security system. If you're asking, is that a trade-off to say I would oppose the COLAs. The answer is no, I do not oppose the COLAs. I don't know why whenever we have an economic problem in this country, the first people we look at to bear the burden is the elderly, the next are the women, and the last are the children. And I happen to think that that's wrong. I think that the elderly have invested in the Social Security system. They are not necessarily responsible for inflation, but I don't think they ought to be penalized by it either.
How much money would that add to the Social Security system if you took care of the notch babies? Could that be funded under the present Social Security taxes, or would that require a round of increased Social Security taxes to pay for it? I don't know the answer to the question.
I don't either.
Okay.
I suspect, I guess I'm on next, is that right?
Well, if you want to be.
I suspect that to add anything else, let alone the window of the generation of notch babies into the Social Security system as it currently exists, will add additional burdens to the system. The question is, as a nation, do we want Social Security that provides a floor below which none of our citizens fall? That's the fundamental question. And do we have the fortitude to do that? I'm suggesting that's something that this nation wants, and I'm suggesting that's something that we should be prepared to do when we go to Congress, so that we do, in fact, contemplate the tremendous impact that it's going to have in terms of additional revenues needed on this process. But we ought to take our heads up out of the sand and face that issue squarely and not try to skirt around it.
Another question from the audience. Tom?
With me now is Mildred Lyons. Ms. Lyons, your question, please.
My question is for Phil Bredesen. And the question is, two of the problems facing minority enterprises doing business with the federal government are the red tape and the burdensome regulations. If elected to Congress, what would you do about this?
Burdensome regulations and red tape are not limited to minority enterprises in dealing with the federal government, as you well know. I think that realistically, a freshman congressman is not going to make massive changes in the federal contracting system. I believe very strongly that we should encourage and enhance the programs in the federal government which attempt to make available to minority businesses a portion of contracts which are let, to ensure that minority businesses have a fair share of the business which tax dollars are paying for in this country. And I strongly support those kinds of programs, as I have in the past, relating to the city and the like. I think also that a good congressman's office, and particularly one with a businessman in it who understands some of the problems of doing business, can be a real facilitator in helping to at least start to cut through some of the red tape that's associated with federal contracting. And I pledge to you very strongly to do that.
Does that answer your question?
It does.
Okay, thank you. We'll be back to continue our questioning of the candidates right after this message.
This is a challenging time for Nashville and Middle Tennessee. We are seeing growth and development all over this region, and that growth can help the Nashville area be an even better place to live in the years ahead. As Middle Tennesseans, we care about the quality of life we enjoy here. This is a good place to live, work, and raise our children. We welcome growth and development, but as it comes, we need to keep those things that make this area so attractive in the first place. The Nashville Area Chamber of Commerce is 7,200 plus men and women who are active in this community in business, in volunteer, civic, and charitable organizations, and who care deeply about the future of this region. For that reason, the Chamber has been active this year in helping to carry on a conversation about regional planning and cooperation among the counties in our region so we can plan for and cope with the growth that's coming. I invite you to be part of this discussion, perhaps the most important single question we face as a community in this decade. Another thrust for the Chamber this year has been to do more for our very broad membership. This event tonight touches virtually all our members. We hope we've created a way to lay some questions before the candidates that are pertinent to your family, your business, and to our region. We hope to be involved again during the general election in January. Thank you.
News beyond the front page, beyond the TV screen,
What happens behind the scenes?
I didn't want to tear so much up that we're going to go away.
Tell them it's going to be coming in late and we need it super fast.
Jim Watkins goes behind the scenes of news story decisions. What's news? Tonight at 10 on Channel 5, Eyewitness News. Honored with television's most prestigious award, the Emmy, for Nashville's most outstanding newscasts. Channel 5, Eyewitness News.
And now we continue with a question for each of our candidates. Mr. Searcy, it's your turn to go first. And the question is simply pick out one of your opponents and ask a question.
Well, I generally don't have much to ask my opponents. I'm much more interested in asking the voters what they think. Since they're already committed, I hesitate in that regard. But let me ask Mr. Bredesen, because I've asked him this before, so he should be prepared for it now. How do you justify giving George Bush, the leading candidate of the Republican Party, now $1,000 to his campaign coffers, and at the same time lay claim to giving leadership to the Democratic Party here in the 5th Congressional District?
Well, I think that's a pretty easy question to answer, and one certainly I've answered a fair number of times from you, Walter.
Obviously, I've never been satisfied.
That's right. I ran for mayor in a nonpartisan, that means not Democratic, not Republican race. And one of the things that I wished to do in that race was attend a function at which there were probably 1,200 Republicans who might be voters, who might have some influence on my ability to become mayor. I didn't want to contribute myself, and my wife, who you can direct the question to after the session here if you want, bought a ticket for me to the fundraiser. That's the full and complete story of the George Bush contribution. I've contributed considerably more than that to Democratic candidates, including the maximum amount to Al Gore from our own state here. And I think I lay as solid a claim to being a strong and loyal and believing Democrat as anybody sitting up here, and I resent any attempt to characterize me otherwise, frankly.
Mr. Bredesen, you're next. Pick out a candidate and ask a question.
All right, I'd like to ask Mr. Clement a question. That probably comes as a massive surprise to everyone. Yeah.
Trying to draw you out.
During the course of this campaign, I kept track of some of the various kinds of things that you'd proposed that need doing, including things like federal government paying a third of public education costs, catastrophic insurance, funds for the elderly, daycare bill, just the other night, $13 billion worth. I mean, I came up